We're here on day 4 of the UN climate talks in Panama, and we've got the Australian Ambassador for Climate Change, Louise, who's kindly given us some time out of her incredibly busy schedule to talk. And we've got a couple of questions from our UN Climate Tracker supporters we're going to run through, and then a couple of questions from me. So firstly, Louise, this question's from Ben, one of our supporters in Melbourne, and he wants to know your feelings around this negotiation compared with other negotiations, and whether there's a kind of greater sense of urgency and a commitment to take action, or is there still a kind of lack of political will by some countries?
Look, there are several interesting points from Ben Campbell in Melbourne. I'm reading upside down. It's an excellent skill to have. There's several parts to that. One is, the sort of metabolism of a negotiation often goes through points where it's not at all clear how it's all going to work. And, we're at that point now where there's a number of proposals out there. There's, different camps, and at some point soon it will all start to take a bit more of the shape of the wheeling and dealing that's required. In terms of the sense of urgency, I don't think there's any doubt that the overwhelming majority of countries in this negotiation feel that climate change is an urgent issue and needs to be acted on seriously at the domestic level in a profound kind of way. When Ben says, is there still a lack of will, I think that's a kind of, I think that's a sort of mischaracterization. I don't think there's plenty of will out there. It's just some of it goes in the opposite direction to our will. What you're looking at is a sort of geopolitical struggle in some ways between countries that really desperately want reform economically that takes account of climate change, and countries that don't see that as being in their national interest one way or another. So there's no lack of passion or lack of will. It just doesn't always head in the same direction. And I think that when we see these periods where it looks passive, it looks like it's going nowhere, what you're actually seeing is these roadblocks that come because of the really very significant differences in countries, how they perceive their own national interest. So if you look at it through the prism of the geopolitical realities of the world we're in now, it really is an enormously complex and difficult struggle, which I think, Ben, is why voices like the Cartagena group, which have grown up over the last 2 years, Cartagena Dialogue, which has made it possible for many of these middle ground developing and developed countries to be more outspoken. You get a more interesting texture in the discussion and the possibility of finding more breakthroughs. It probably doesn't look very dramatic from where Ben is, but these, in a process of incrementalism, this is original and innovative and has the power to change things.
Yep, fantastic. The next question comes from Megan Hellier in Brisbane, another one of our UN Climate Tracker supporters. She says, Louise, given that Australia's lower house of parliament is to vote on the carbon price legislation in a few weeks, what difference will passing the legislation make on the negotiations, but also global efforts to deal with climate change?
Yes, it's an interesting question, and one thing I can say absolutely unambiguously is that countries have watched Australia over the last couple of years quite closely. There's a lot in the public domain, and seen, with a certain amount of mystification and occasionally horror, the tracking of this particular policy in Australia. But the government, having got this agreement in the multi-party committee and put it to Parliament, it's just absolutely roundly applauded. I can't tell you how positive other delegations and other countries and other ministers are, and how much they wish for the success of the Australian government in this endeavour. And I think some countries have told us that it could even be seen as a kind of game changer in a difficult year, because if a country like Australia is able to make this significant economic reform with a very powerful and strong future focus, then that offers hope to a number of other countries. It's also a sign, an overt sign of Australia's commitment to dealing, to being part of global action on this issue. So it's been very well received, and once it's legislated, once it's enacted, then I think we'll see it received globally as a very good development.
Great. This next question comes from Vanessa Lee in Sydney. She writes, seeing that Australia uses some Kyoto mechanisms in terms of accounting its emissions and also supports a market mechanism to reduce its pollution, can you outline what the conditions for Australia would be to support a second commitment period of the protocol, which is due to expire in 2012?
Look, the conditions for a second commitment period have been quite unchanged over the last couple of years. The government says that it will sign up to a second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol. Vanessa, if there are similar commitments captured by all the major emitters, that is an agreement that includes where the future emissions are likely to come from and captures those in some kind of regime. Now, right now, today, that's not prospective. But in terms of the Kyoto rules, we recognise that the Kyoto, there's a lot of deeply embedded, highly institutionalised work that is derived from Kyoto. Much of it we would like to see very much in a future regime. So the sense is that those things will exist in some form. We would like, Australia would like to see some mutations of those rules that take account of a more inclusive land use policies. But overwhelmingly, we want all countries in, and we would like rules that made it possible for rules that were sufficiently flexible, or rule regimes that were sufficiently flexible to bring in all major emitters over time.